Welcome back to our channel. Today, let's continue to dive deeper into the 2024 NBA trade candidates for this offseason, categorized for clarity. Let's get started. Category 4, Free Agents and Player Options. The following can choose to move through free agency, but are also possible trade candidates. 1. LeBron James of Los Angeles Lakers. All indications suggest that James will stay in Los Angeles. If he were to consider moving elsewhere, aside from teams with cap space, with Philadelphia being the most attractive among them, it would likely have to be through an opt-in and trade. Although this scenario is improbable, it's worth noting that the Warriors showed interest in James at the trade deadline in February, and other teams are expected to make attempts as well. 2. DeMar of Chicago Bulls. Most teams with cap space are in rebuilding phases and are unlikely to pursue DeRozan. According to Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago, DeRozan declined a 2-year contract potentially worth up to $40 million annually, indicating he still seeks a high salary. If Chicago isn't the place for him to secure such a deal, a sign and trade with a strong team would be the most feasible option. 3. deangelorussel of Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers are keen for Russell to opt into the final year of his contract, worth $18.7 million, so they can use his expiring deal as trade capital. However, Russell would likely prefer to explore free agency, choosing his next destination and securing a longer-term contract. For this strategy to be feasible, he would need to be confident in getting a substantial long-term offer. Currently, there is no clear suitor on the market, making Russell a potential trade candidate if he opts in. Category 5, Cap Dumps. The following players have contracts that their incumbent teams would either actively like to dump or may need to dump for some specific purpose. 4. Zachlavine of Chicago Bulls. The Bulls missed their chance to trade LaVine when his value was high and attempted to get value when it had diminished. Now, they are reportedly open to accepting lower offers, but the opportunity for a straightforward cap dump seems to have passed. To offload the remaining 3 maximum years of LaVine's contract, the Bulls might need to include draft picks. In the current financial landscape, it's uncertain if any team would be willing to take on that burden. It would likely need to be a rebuilding team that can afford 3 years of a hefty contract in hopes of reviving his value. Such teams exist, but they are rare. 5. John Collins of Utah. Jazz. The Jazz acquired Collins in a cap dump last offseason. With 2 years remaining on his unfavorable contract and younger players like Walker Kessler and Taylor Hendricks needing more minutes, plus another lottery pick on the way, the Jazz might be second-guessing the decision. While Utah isn't currently facing financial constraints and Collins remains a valuable player, they would likely be open to moving him if it can be done without difficulty. 6. Nicolavucevic of Chicago Bulls. Chicago essentially competed against itself by offering Vucevic a $60 million deal that no other team was likely to match last offseason. Last season, he performed at a backup level. If the Bulls re-sign DeRozan and Patrick Williams, they will be nearing the luxury tax threshold. They would love to offload the final 2 years of Vucevic's contract, but it's doubtful any team would be interested in paying that much for a backup center. 7. Tim Hardaway Jr. of Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks will need to free up some salary space to use the full mid-level exception on defensive standout Derrick Jones Jr., who played last season on a minimum salary, ensuring he stays in Dallas. Hardaway is the clear candidate for potential trade or salary dump, especially since Jaden Hardy demonstrated during the postseason that he can effectively fill the role of a bench scorer and shooter for the Mavericks. 8. pjtucker of Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers aim to stay under the luxury tax threshold, but if George re-signs, they'll need additional support. Given Tucker's limited impact after the deadline, he appears to be a prime candidate for trade or release. While his $11.5 million salary isn't exorbitant, another team might consider acquiring him to bolster their defensive capabilities. 9. maxikleber, Mavericks. Kleber is the other candidate for a Mavericks savings trade. He's a valuable stretch big option that can also defend wings, but he's constantly injured and with Derek Lively II and Daniel Gafford entrenched at center, Dallas may feel comfortable moving on and relying on Jones Jr. and PJ Washington fully as their wings of the future. 10. Zekennaji, Nuggets. The Nuggets re-signed Naji, likely to give themselves a bit of matching salary to use in possible future trades. Having that contract around is still valuable, but the Nuggets are in a bit of a tax crunch themselves. Moving off of Naji now may help them create the cash needed to re-sign Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in free agency without dealing with the second apron. 11. Paulreed, 76ers. Philadelphia matched Utah's offer sheet for Reed last offseason merely to avoid losing an asset for nothing, but now that he's firmly established as a run-of-the-mill backup center, the 76ers would probably rather just pay the minimum for a similar caliber of player and use the $7.7 million he is owed elsewhere in free agency. His contract is not guaranteed, so the 76ers could simply waive him, but he could also feasibly have some trade interest, so he's a candidate here for now. Category 6. Expensive role players. The following role players could help winning teams, but have large salaries that make them complicated trade candidates. 12. cjmccollum, Pelicans. Ingram is the likelier Pelicans trade candidate, but they've been linked to several point guards. Nominally, McCollum has been the starting point guard in New Orleans over the past few years, and he either might be needed as matching salary if Ingram isn't in such a trade, or he might prefer to be moved if the alternative is going to the bench. 13. Jerami Grant, Trailblazers. The Blazers signed Grant to a widely panned 5-year, $160 million contract last offseason, and as predicted, struggled through the first year of a rebuild. That contract is going to get ugly toward the end, but for now, Grant is still a very good starting forward, and those are in short supply. Portland has no path to short-term winning, so cashing out on Grant now and accepting a rebuild is their best bet. 14. Kyle Kuzma, Wizards. The Wizards nearly traded Kuzma to Dallas at the deadline, but when they asked him if he wanted to be moved, he said no. Perhaps another wing-needy team, maybe even his former employers in Los Angeles, could sway him. The Wizards have so much rebuilding time ahead of them that virtually any veteran should be on the table. Kuzma is just the only one anyone seems to want. 15. Cam Johnson, Nets. Anything is on the table in Brooklyn. Need good players to trade for a star? Almost anyone could use a shooting forward like Johnson. Want to go backward and embrace a rebuild? Johnson could be dealt on his own for value. 16. Bruce Brown, Raptors. Brown had a down year in Indiana and Toronto, but only a year ago practically the entire league was chasing him in free agency. The version of him we saw in Denver is one of the most versatile role players in the NBA, and some team will try to trade for him, pick up his team option, and try to extend him at a slightly lower number from there. 17. Malcolm Brogdon, Trail Blazers. The Blazers played with fire by keeping Brogdon at last year's deadline. His injury history means his value could plummet at any given moment, and the Blazers have so many young guards that minutes probably won't be very available for Brogdon moving forward. He was 6th Man of the Year in 2023, so someone could certainly use him on their bench. 18. Clint Capella, Hawks. The Hawks have Onyeka Okongwu ready for a bigger role, and while they aren't locked in on a specific prospect at number 1 overall, French big man Alex Sarr is the current favorite for the top pick. In other words, the Hawks are probably about to be heavily invested in 2 young bigs, so Capella, who was nearly traded to Dallas last summer, will probably be available. 19. Jakob Poeltl, Raptors. Toronto overpaid for Poeltl at the 2023 deadline, and they compounded that mistake with a hefty 4-year contract last offseason. The Raptors don't have an obvious young replacement in the wings, but they traded for Kelly Olynyk at the 2024 deadline, and his ability to shoot will probably be necessary given the makeup of the rest of this roster. A non-spacing, defense-first big man might not be a player archetype that makes sense in Toronto anymore. 20. Bogdanovic, Hawks. The higher profile guards are available in Atlanta, but why should the Hawks start there? If they do trade Young or Murray, their goal will presumably be to get younger. Bogdanovic is 31 and ready to help a win-now team. If they don't trade Young or Murray, no sense in remaining this heavily invested in a third guard. 21. DeAndre Hunter, Hawks. Yes, every member of the 2023-24 Atlanta Hawks, aside from Jalen Johnson, should be considered available. Anyone who watched the 2023-24 Atlanta Hawks would understand this. As the trade rumors swirl and negotiations unfold, fans and analysts alike eagerly await the decisions that will shape the upcoming NBA season. Please comment, like, and share your thoughts on which players you believe will be traded and the potential impact these moves could have on the league. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.